When the chest's lid creaked open on its own, that low rumble whispered the darkest secret of history into my ear. The rusted chest on the beach had been unnervingly still, until a faint, breath-like hum seeped through the sand. It seemed to call, "Release me." My finger brushed the edge of the rusty lid, and my heart felt the weight of centuries. In this video, you'll follow the trail of a centuries-old curse buried under salt and sand, as a rusted chest reveals forbidden relics that test the bonds of family and sanity. What horrors lie within when curiosity overrides every warning? By the end, you'll discover how a single choice can awaken the shadows of the past, even under the brightest sun. Question: have you ever ignored a "do not touch" warning just because you were curious? Comment, "I opened it," or "I walked away," below. I'll share the most thrilling stories in the next video. I was strolling along the deserted shoreline before dawn, the waves murmuring lullabies as gulls slept in their nests. My eyes caught a glint of metal half buried in grainy sand. I knelt, brushing away layers of salt and seaweed to reveal a corroded lid etched with barnacle scars. The chest looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms, yet it felt eerily out of place, as if waiting for me. My hand trembled as I reached out. The lid's edge was sharp and cold, sending a chill up my arm. The wind seemed to hush, and in that silence I heard it, a low, mournful hum rising from within. My breath hitched. Was it just the wind, or something older stirring awake? Etched into the lid's weathered metal was a nearly illegible warning. "Awaken, not the darkness within." Beneath the words, a smear of deep red oxide looked disturbingly like dried blood. The warning was ancient, yet it felt fresh, a final note left by someone who knew what lay inside. Part of me screamed to run, but another part, the curious part, urged me to see it for myself. I took a deep breath, steeling my nerves, and placed my thumb on the hinge. One firm push, and the lid shifted with a groan that echoed like a distant storm. Sand cascaded from the edges, and I braced myself for the sight. A pale, cold glow spilled out, revealing treasures I could barely comprehend. An ornately bound leather tome, a rusted key, and a shattered protective talisman. As the chest opened wider, the hum intensified, a deep vibration that resonated in my chest. It was as if the very air had grown heavy with an unseen presence, waiting to be set free. My pulse raced, every nerve in my body screamed that I was on the brink of something unimaginable. I lifted the vellum-covered book and opened it to the first page. Scrawled in archaic script was a passage: "He who disturbs this slumber shall carry the burden of every soul trapped within." The ink glistened as if wet, and I resisted the urge to read further, yet I couldn't look away. I closed the book and pressed my palm against the shattered talisman. A faint warmth pulsed beneath its cracked surface, as though it still held a heartbeat. I realized then that some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. My reflection in the talisman's dulled metal was not quite my own. I was changed. With a final glance at the corroded key, I faced a choice: leave the chest sealed forever, or delve deeper into its mysteries, and risk awakening whatever lay dormant. The hum swelled, demanding an answer. Heart pounding, I swallowed hard. I pressed pause on the moment and looked at the camera. Are you ready to see what happens when a curse breaks free? Let's find out together. And with that, I plunged forward into the darkness waiting inside the chest. As dawn light seeped into the horizon, I returned to the spot where I'd unsealed the chest. The tide had pulled back further under a pale sky, revealing a wider swath of sand. The chest sat in the same place, its lid now slightly ajar, a silent invitation. I approached, careful not to disturb the displaced shells around it, and ran my fingers along the rusted carvings one more time. Each notch seemed to whisper of secrets older than the shoreline itself. I circled the chest, examining every surface. Corrosion had eaten through the metal in patches, exposing dark, pitted wood beneath. Barnacles clustered on one side, as if clinging for survival. I spotted what looked like ritualistic markings, a circle intersected by a vertical line, etched into one corner. It was a symbol I couldn't decipher, but its intentionality was unmistakable. Someone had sealed more than objects inside. The lock was bulky, encrusted with salt and rust. I pried gently at its hasp, but it resisted. Using the edge of my pocket knife, I scraped away decades of grime until the lock's mechanism was revealed. With one careful turn, it clicked open. The lid creaked in protest as I forced it back, sanding dust falling like archaic confetti. Peering into the chest, I saw 3 distinct items nestled in sand: a leather-bound volume, a corroded iron key, and a fragmented metal talisman. The chest's interior was lined with a faded red cloth, once plush, now threadbare. It gave the sense that the original owner had padded these relics as if they were precious beyond measure. I reached past the key and talisman to lift the leather-bound book. Its cover was supple despite its age, and a faint scent of cedar and old parchment drifted upward. The spine creaked as I opened to the first page, revealing handwritten entries in a language I only partially recognized. Intrigued, I snapped a photo with my phone, knowing I'd need a closer look later. Next, I turned to the key. It was heavy and ornate, the head shaped like a sunburst. A tiny inscription along its shaft read, "Sanctum." It hinted at a larger purpose, perhaps another lock awaiting discovery. I tucked the key into my pocket, feeling its weight as a promise of further mysteries. The talisman lay cracked open, revealing intricate filigree and a central gemstone that once glowed. Now it was dull, but I could sense its lingering energy. I held it up to the light. Sunbeams caught its fractured surface, scattering rainbow flecks across the sand. The same hum that had awakened when I opened the chest vibrated softly through it. I placed each item on a clean sheet of paper, labeling them carefully. 1. Leather tome. 2. Iron key. 3. Shattered talisman. The notebook I carried became a flurry of notes and sketches. Every detail mattered. The stitching on the book's binding, the depth of the key's rust, the exact pattern of cracks on the talisman. As I finished, a sudden gust of wind rattled the chest's lid. I stepped back, heart pounding. The tide's roar grew louder, as though urging me to make a choice, investigate further, or flee. But the discovery itself had irrevocably changed me. I closed my eyes, breathed in salty air, and prepared for whatever came next. I closed the chest's lid gently, but the hum didn't subside. Instead, it grew louder, vibrating through the damp sand at my feet. With each passing second, the energy pulsed like a heartbeat, steady but insistent. I placed one palm atop the chest's outer surface and felt a low-frequency vibration ripple up my arm. The sound wasn't wind or tide. It was something alive, something drawing breath from the buried depths. Hesitant, yet compelled, I reopened the chest and lifted the leather-bound tome. As I flipped through the brittle pages, the words seemed to shimmer. The hum reacted, fluctuating in intensity as if keyed to the text itself. On one page, a phrase caught my eye. "Let the voice of the sealed awaken the watcher in the deep." The script's elegant loops traced an invocation, and I realized the chest's contents weren't merely relics, they were catalysts for a dormant force. Next, I retrieved the shattered talisman and held it above the chest. The hum crescendoed and a faint glow pulsed from the gemstone core. Shadows danced on the rocks behind me. Peering through the talisman's cracked surface, I saw a flicker, like a pair of eyes, reflected in the gemstone's facets. My breath caught. Was I glimpsing the watcher mentioned in the book? I noticed that the medieval sunburst key fit into a hidden slot beneath the chest's lock. With trembling hands, I inserted it. The key turned with a reluctant click, unlocking an unseen latch at the chest's base. A vent-like panel slid open, revealing a coiled bronze tube network inside. It resembled an ancient resonator, its spiraling pipes likely amplifying the hum outward. The chest had been designed not only to conceal, but to broadcast. Leaning closer, I saw tiny runic inscriptions etched along the pipes, symbols of sound and summoning. Pressing my ear to the vent, I heard layered tones, a low rumble, a high-pitched whine, and an undertone like whispering voices. The resonator was amplifying residual energy, maybe the collective fear or worship of generations past. The chest wasn't passive, it was an instrument, channeling long-forgotten rituals. Suddenly, the sand around the chest shifted, as though buoyed by the hum. A ring of pebbles circled the chest's perimeter, forming a perfect circle. I stepped back, unsettled by the precise geometry. It was as though the chest's power was rearranging its environment to complete a protective seal, or a prison for something beyond. Each pulse of the hum synced with my racing heartbeat, creating disorientation. I staggered, clutching the chest's edge. The tide's distant crash felt muted, as if reality itself were bending to the chest's resonance. A voice inside my mind, distinct from the hum, whispered in a tongue I didn't recognize. Gooseflesh rose on my arms. Fighting panic, I recalled the tome's warning, "When sound awakens the deep, only the pure of heart may still its call." I steeled myself, closed my eyes, and focused on steady breathing. Visualizing a calm sea at dawn, I imagined the hum subsiding. Slowly, the vibration lessened. Each breath I took seemed to absorb the frequency, drawing it inward. When I opened my eyes, the chest was still, its vents closed. The circle of pebbles lay unmoved. The resonator pipes were inert, and the gemstone glimmer had faded. I exhaled, relief and exhilaration mingling in my chest. I had quelled the hum, at least temporarily, but the chest's power was undeniable, and I now understood it required respect, not exploitation. I replaced the tome, key, and talisman carefully inside the chest, and closed the hidden vent. As I locked the hasp, I resolved to learn more about the ritual that bound this device, and the entity it guarded. The hum was a whisper from history, a call to uncover the full story, and I was determined to answer. Back at the chest's side, I placed the leather tome on a driftwood bench and flipped to the pages with rune illustrations. Each symbol, loops, spirals, and jagged lines, was paired with explanatory notes in faded Latin. I traced my fingertip over a spiral rune, its meaning glossed as Cycle of Awakening, and a vertical line bisecting a circle labeled Veil of Silence. Together they formed a mantra intended to both bind and amplify supernatural forces. Using my phone's translation app, I photographed the rune passages. The text read, "He who holds the key may unlock the binding chant, yet only by honoring the silence may he return the spirit to rest." The chant itself was written in archaic script beneath. I realized the chest's dual purpose: to conceal the ritual and to serve as its vessel. Unwittingly or by design, opening the chest had breached the veil, prompting the hum and the chest's resonance. As I read aloud the translation, a sudden breeze rattled the pages. Though I was indoors, the whisper of wind carried a faint echo of the chest's hum. The words, "honoring the silence," echoed in my mind. If I wanted to prevent the curse from spreading, I would need to perform the binding chant exactly as described, without deviation or haste. The tome's index pointed me to a fold-out section at the book's end. I carefully unfolded a triangular flap to reveal the full incantation. Its verses spanned 2 pages, surrounded by protective glyphs. The chant began with a plea for mercy, referenced lunar phases, and ended with a final invocation to seal the voice beneath the sands. Each line was rhythmic, meant to be spoken in measured cadence. Remembering the chest's demonstration under the moonlit willow, I knew the chant required a specific setting. I gathered salt, white candles, and a circle of smooth pebbles, Earth's silent witnesses. Back on the beach, I cleared a small area around the chest, laying the pebbles in a perfect circle and lighting candles at the 4 cardinal points. The tide's whisper was my metronome. With the tome open before me, I began the chant in a steady voice. By sands that bind what time forgot, by silent depths of ocean's grot, I call upon the hidden host, restore the veil, forsake your boast. The candles flickered, a hush fell over the shore, as if the sea itself paused to listen. My words hung on the night air, alive with purpose. As I completed the first verse, the rune glyphs in the chest's vent glowed faintly. The spiral rune pulsed, and the veil symbol shimmered. I pressed my palm against the chest's surface, feeling warmth where metal had been cool. The resonance waned, replaced by a low, heartbeat-like thrum, a sign the ritual was taking effect. I continued through the verses, each line delivered with unwavering focus. The hum returned briefly, then receded as I reached the invocation's climax. Let silence reign beneath the tide. Let voices rest where they once cried. At the final word, I placed the talisman back into its central slot on the chest's lid. The gemstones inlaid within the metal seams flickered, then went dark. A profound silence followed. No wind, no surf, only the distant call of a lone gull. The chest's latent energy, once a throbbing hum, was now still. I exhaled, relief washing over me in gentle waves. The binding chant had sealed whatever had stirred inside. I snuffed out the candles one by one and scattered the pebbles back into the tide. The ritual was complete, but its implications weighed on me. I had touched an ancient power and then silenced it. Whether the chest would remain dormant or awaken again remained unknown. Yet for now, the veil of silence held fast, and the beach returned to its wind-swept calm. With the chest's lid sealed and the ritual complete, I let my gaze rest on the 3 artifacts laid out on the sand. The shattered talisman, the sunburst key, and the leather-bound tome. The book's cover was embossed with a faint symbol matching one of the runes, an eye within a spiral. Intrigued, I lifted it again, dusting off grains of sand. The leather was supple yet worn, its spine creaking as I opened to a bookmarked page halfway through. The page bore a preface in flowing script. To the seeker of forbidden lore, know that this tome records the first awakening of the Silent Watcher. Within these pages, find instruction for the binding and the liberation, but beware the price of knowledge. My heart pounded. This was no ordinary grimoire. It chronicled the entity itself, a presence bound beneath the chest for centuries. I realized the book was both guide and warning, a manual for those who dared to meddle in powers beyond mortal ken. I flipped through the tome, noting distinct sections. Origins of the Watcher. Accounts of sailors who vanished after storms believed to be claimed by the entity. Binding rituals. Descriptions of chants and symbols used to lock the spirit away. Prophecies of return. Cryptic verses hinting at a future time when the Watcher would walk free. Each section was illustrated with intricate sketches, a sea-bound figure wreathed in mist, hands reaching from below the sand, and a watchful eye etched into a crescent moon. The artistry was haunting, part myth, part documented history. I paused at an illustration of the chest itself, rendered in meticulous detail. Annotations in the margin described how the original builder, known only as the Sandward Mason, infused the chest with sand and ritual metalwork to imprison the Watcher. Beneath the drawing, in crimson ink, was one chilling line. He who unlocks must pay the debt of 3 souls. My breath caught. Had I already incurred that debt by simply opening the chest? Turning to the prophecy section, I found a short verse in archaic verse. When blood of kin and sand entwine, the Silent Watcher claims its sign. 3 hearts must tremble, bound in fear, or darkness falls when dawn draws near. The wording was unmistakable. This curse involved family, blood of kin. My mind raced back to the chest's uncanny connection to family legends I'd heard whispered as a child. The prophecy suggested that to keep the watcher bound, 3 acts of courage or sacrifice might be required. I quietly inserted the sunburst key into its matching slot on the tome's clasp. The artifact fit perfectly, unlocking a hidden compartment in the book's back cover. Inside, I discovered an additional parchment, a map fragment showing the shoreline with a red X marking a cedar stump by the dunes. This was clearly another location connected to the Watcher's lore. Holding the map fragment, I felt the weight of both opportunity and danger. The tome offered the promise of deeper understanding, yet each revelation carried grim implications. I closed the book gently, clasping it with the key still in place, and tucked it into a protective cover. I slid the leather-bound tome beside the chest, alongside the talisman and the key. The tide had begun its return, and I knew time was short. My next move would be to visit the location on the map at dawn, where the cedar stump stood, and uncover the next artifact or clue. As moonlight glinted on the damp sand, I acknowledged the path ahead. A journey into whispered legends and dangerous rites. With the first artifact secured, I felt both empowered and vulnerable. The Watcher's story was only beginning to unfold, and I was now a part of its unfolding saga. With the leather-bound tome in hand, I resolved to keep moving forward, guided by the artifacts and the warnings they bore. Each step would draw me closer to the Watcher's heart, and to the truth concealed beneath centuries of sand and silence. Under the pale dawn light, I retrieved the ornate iron key from the makeshift pouch at my hip. Its heavy head was shaped like a radiant sunburst, each ray etched with fine filigree now darkened by corrosion. The key's shaft bore tiny runic carvings matching symbols in the tome's binding ritual section. I turned it over in my hand, feeling its weight and the promise it carried. Rust flaked from the key when I nudged it gently with my thumbnail. Beneath the oxidation, the iron was smooth and cool, evidence of frequent handling by generations long past. Faint dents along the ridges hinted at hurried, perhaps desperate uses, opening and closing the chest under duress. This wasn't just a relic of ceremony, it had been a tool of necessity. I knelt beside the sealed chest and located the keyhole hidden in the lower front panel. The key slid in with a soft click, aligning perfectly despite centuries of neglect. As I turned it, I felt small gears shift within the chest's inner lockwork. A muffled rumble suggested the internal vent, once opened, now gently closed again, as though resealing its chamber. With a final quarter turn, the key released a separate latch. A thin plate beneath the chest's base slid outward, revealing a hidden drawer carved into the wood. The drawer was lined with faded velvet, once deep crimson, and held a single object, a slender metal rod capped with a crescent moon shape. I lifted the rod carefully, examining the moon-shaped head. Its surface was inscribed with a sequence of angular marks, another rune, this one representing lunar passage. The rod felt warm, almost alive. According to the tome, the crescent rod was used to chart the path when tides of fate turn, a tool for guiding the ritual under specific moon phases. I realized how the artifacts formed a sequence. The talisman and key activated the chest's hum. The tome provided the ritual, and the crescent rod would align the ritual's timing with the natural cycles. The sunburst key and moon-tipped rod symbolized a balance of solar and lunar forces, day and night, seen and unseen. Curious, I pressed the rod's moon head against the chest's surface. The rune glowed faintly, and the crescent caught the morning light. A whisper of energy passed through my fingertips, as if the rod had momentarily bridged 2 worlds. The tactile connection reinforced that each artifact was not inert, but part of a living, dynamic mechanism. I took a quick photograph of the rod and its compartment with my phone for later reference. In my notebook, I sketched its shape and noted the inscription, Lunar Passage. I jotted down the correlation between the rod's glow and the chest's muted pulse, details I'd need to reference when performing the next phase of the binding rituals. Pondering the rod's purpose, I recalled the prophecies of return. Under the moon's soft gaze, the watcher may roam until the crescent guides it home. It was clear the rod would be instrumental in guiding the watcher's spirit, either back into its prison or into the world. I resolved that my next step would be to use the crescent rod at the upcoming crescent moonrise to ensure the binding remained unbroken. I returned the crescent rod to its drawer and slid the plate closed. With a reverse turn, I locked the drawer and removed the sunburst key. Carefully, I stowed the key in the sand-resistant pouch, safe but ready for the next ritual. As I stood, the tide lapped at my boots, a reminder that time and nature advanced relentlessly. And so would I, guided by these artifacts, toward the watcher's final confinement. Carefully, I removed the shattered talisman from the chest's inner velvet. Its filigreed metal had split along several seams, revealing a smoky quartz core now fractured into jagged shards. I laid each piece out on a cloth, 4 curved metal sections and 2 quartz fragments. The talisman's design, an encircled eye, seemed to weep through its broken form, as though the watcher itself had attempted to break free. Under a small LED lamp, I inspected the metal fragments. Each bore part of the eye motif, the upper eyelid here, the pupil outline there, and the radiating lashes etched into one of the larger shards. The craftsmanship was exquisite, hand-forged by someone skilled in both art and arcane symbolism. Yet the fractures were fresh, suggesting a deliberate act of sabotage, or a surge of supernatural force. I opened the leather-bound book to the binding rituals section. Illustrated on one page was a complete talisman, alongside instructions for its creation and repair. When the seal weakens, the talisman shall crack. To mend its power, the shards must be reunited under moonlit chant. A footnote warned that an imperfect repair could amplify the watcher's influence instead of containing it. Determined to restore the talisman, I gathered white linen strips, purified salt, and a small silver needle, tools recommended in the tome for talisman reforging. On an oyster shell, I mixed sea salt with crushed sage leaves, creating a protective bed. The ritual required precision and reverence. Any slip might doom the effort. I arranged the metal fragments in their proper order on the sage salt bed, aligning the eye's curve and the lashes. Gently, I threaded the silver needle with a single flaxen thread and stitched the metal sections together, joining them with careful loops at each fracture point. With each stitch, the eye motif began to re-emerge whole, though small gaps remained. Next, I positioned the quartz fragments in the talisman's center. According to the tome, the quartz acted as a spiritual lens. Hold the shards in place and let moonlight fuse spirit and seal. I left the talisman outside overnight, placing it under the waxing crescent. The cool air and soft lunar glow were meant to bond metal and crystal, binding the watcher's essence back beneath the chest. Under the pale arc of the crescent moon, I retrieved the talisman. The quartz core glowed faintly, and the metal seams were no longer jagged, but fused flush. The eye symbol now appeared seamless, its lashes crisp and unbroken. The talisman felt warm, as if alive again, its protective aura stronger than before. To test the talisman's power, I pressed it against the chest's lid. A low, harmonious tone resonated, far different from the discordant hum it had emitted earlier. The chest's metal vibrated softly in response, as though acknowledging the talisman's renewed integrity. I closed the lid fully and watched as the talisman's glow faded to a soft ember, indicating that the watcher's binding held firm. Reforging the talisman had demanded both skill and courage, willingness to touch fragmented power, and trust in the ritual. The process reminded me that containing evil often requires personal risk. Yet, as the talisman lay whole in my palm, I felt a surge of hope. The watcher's restless call was now silenced, at least for another cycle. I wrapped the restored talisman in the linen strip and tucked it into my pouch alongside the sunburst key and crescent rod. With 2 artifacts repaired and 1 stored, I was better prepared for the watcher's next stirrings. The chest stood silent, the tide's hush reclaiming the beach, and I, its guardian for the night, resolved to remain vigilant until sunrise. By late afternoon, I returned to the secluded cove where the chest first emerged. The tide was low, revealing jagged rocks and tide pools glowing in amber light. I cleared a flat stone platform, cleaned of seaweed and shells, then laid out the 3 artifacts: the restored talisman, the crescent rod, and the sunburst key before me. The tome lay open, its pages fluttering in the breeze, marking the section titled Dark Invocation. Following the binding rituals, I traced a protective circle in the sand with the crescent rod. The rod's moon-etched head carved a precise arc, leaving a faint, luminescent line that dimmed quickly in the fading light. I sprinkled purified salt along the circle's boundary, forming a barrier against the watcher's influence. 4 white candles placed at cardinal points on the circle glowed softly, their flames dancing in the sea breeze. The tome instructed me to recite the invocation of shadows, a chant designed to prevent the watcher from escaping its cage. With the sunburst key held in my left hand, symbolizing the binding of solar power, and the talisman in my right, I spoke in a deliberate cadence. Shadows born of ancient sand, keep your silence by my hand. Moon and sun, bind and seal. Darkness rest till time is healed. As dusk deepened into night, the crescent moon rose above the horizon. Its pale light struck the talisman, which began to glow softly in my hand. I repeated the verses, each word resonating against the cliffs, echoing like distant drums. The sea's lapping waves harmonized with the chant, creating a haunting chorus that blurred the boundary between the physical and the arcane. Midway through the chant, a low rumble rose from beneath the stone platform, the watcher's objection. The sand within the circle trembled, and shadows lengthened unnaturally around me. A wind gusted, extinguishing 2 of the candles. My heart hammered, but I pressed on, voice steady. Let the tide's embrace confine your wrath. Let silence mark your hidden path. With shaking hands, I used the crescent rod's heated tip, warmed earlier by sunlight, to relight the extinguished candles. Their flames flared defiantly, re-establishing the circle's integrity. The shadows recoiled slightly at the restored light, buying me precious moments to finish the chant. At the final line, I pressed the talisman against the central stone, its symbolic heart of the circle. The gemstone blazed, casting prismatic patterns across the cove. I turned the sunburst key in an imaginary lock gesture, visualizing the watcher's chains tightening. The chanting ceased, and the talisman's glow subsided into a steady pulse. The rumble faded and the sand stilled. The candle flames steadied. No more tremors, no more howls of wind. A deep, abiding silence settled over the cove as if the very earth had exhaled. The watcher's power, once restless, was now subdued by the joint force of moonlight, sunlight, and spoken word. I collected the artifacts, placing them reverently back into the chest. The stone platform, once a stage for dark energies, was now cleansed by the moon's calm glow. I extinguished the candles and brushed away the protective salt, returning the cove to its natural state, an empty shore under starlit sky. Standing at the water's edge, I watched the sea wash away footprints and remnants of the ceremony. Though the watcher lay dormant, I knew its seal could weaken again. I vowed to return with each lunar cycle, to renew the ritual if needed, and to safeguard the secret beneath the sand. The chest's silent sentinel rested, its dark mission secured, at least for another night. Long before sunrise, I returned alone to the cove's edge. The tide had crept back, washing away most signs of last night's ritual. Yet as I stepped onto the wet sand, I heard it, a faint whisper carried on the waves, like a distant voice calling my name. My pulse quickened. Was the watcher testing its bonds, or was the sea merely singing its own lullaby? I closed my eyes and crouched low, pressing an ear to the sand. The whispers formed patterns, fragments of a plea, half words lost in the surf. Free, release, darkness. I tapped out a rhythm with my fingertips, matching the cadence. The whispers faded, leaving only the rhythmic lapping of water. Had the watcher spoken through the tide, or was I hearing echoes of my own fear? I noticed that the protective circle's outline, drawn in the sand, was faintly retraced by foam from the waves. The salt water seeped into the lines, offering a subtle reinforcement of the barrier. Nature itself seemed to aid the binding, as though the ocean remembered the ritual and sought to preserve its outcome. As the foam retreated, it left behind a single word scrawled in wet sand. Remember. I knelt and touched the letters, feeling a chill. The warning was clear. Tonight's ritual was not the final chapter. I must recall every detail, every verse, and remain vigilant against complacency. Retrieving the restored talisman, I held it up to the east, letting the pre-dawn light reflect through its quartz. Then I scooped 7 smooth pebbles from the tide line, each polished by the sea over eons. According to an obscure passage in the tome, these stones, when placed around the talisman, would absorb residual echoes of the watcher's voice. On a flat driftwood log, I arranged the pebbles in a circle, placing the talisman at the center. I whispered a short verse learned from the tome's margins. Pebbles of sea, keep silent the plea, lock every whisper beneath calm and lee. With each word, I pressed a pebble into the sand, and the whispering ceased, replaced by a profound stillness that echoed within my chest. I realized that binding the watcher wasn't just my burden. It was a covenant between me and the elements, sand, sea, and sky. The ocean's cooperation in retracing the circle and accepting the rinsing of salt over my sigils showed a pact forged in trust. To honor it, I needed to integrate nature's cycles into every future ritual. After the foam had smoothed over the pebbles and talisman, I gathered each artifact once more. The talisman's eye glowed faintly, an ember of purpose, while the rod and key lay heavy in my pouch. I tucked them away into a watertight bag, sealing them for safekeeping. I sat on a nearby boulder, watching the horizon turn from indigo to pale gold. The sea, once a conduit of whispers, now lay calm and reflective. With each wave, I felt the ritual's echo fade into a promise. The watcher would sleep so long as I remained its guardian. As the sun peeked over the horizon, I rose, brushing sand from my knees. I whispered to the cove, "I will return with the moon's every phase, and the sea will answer my call." Turning away, I carried the weight of both relics and responsibility, knowing that the watcher's whispers would guide me back whenever the sand stirred again. That afternoon, back in my study, I spread the family heirlooms across the oak desk, photos of ancestors, faded letters, and a worn family Bible. I'd heard whispers since childhood of a sea spirit haunting our bloodline, passed down in hushed folk tales. Now, with tangible artifacts in hand, I wondered, had those tales referred to the very watcher I'd just bound? Among the relics, I found my grandmother's leather-bound journal from the 1960s. Its yellowed pages described a family curse. Our blood is linked to the sea's forgotten promise. Each generation must calm the restless tide, lest the deep awaken. She wrote of midnight vigils on the shore, rituals lost to time. I realized her words mapped precisely onto my own actions with the chest. I cross-referenced names in the journal with genealogy records. The earliest mention dated to an ancestor named Alaric Marin, a sailor rumored to have bargained with sea spirits to save his stranded crew. In return, the spirits demanded annual penance, a ritual at the water's edge. Alaric's descendants carried that debt unwittingly, their duties forgotten as the family moved inland, until now. I uncovered a faded portrait of Alaric Marin standing sternly on a deck, his gaze fixed on stormy seas. Clutched in his hand was an object resembling the sunburst key. The painting confirmed that my family lineage had been the chest's original keepers. The key, passed down through generations, bound each Marin heir to the watcher's vigil. On the journal's margins, my grandmother had underlined a passage. To honor the watery covenant, one must stand sentinel when the moon lies low and renew the binding or face the rising tide. Her note beside it read simply, "Never forget." I felt a shiver. My grandmother had known, and prepared me through those stories, even without revealing the full truth. I closed the grandmother's journal and placed it beside the leather tome from the chest. 2 books now bore the weight of my family's pact. One chronicled the Watcher's lore. The other framed it in personal history. Embracing this connection meant accepting my role as the latest sentinel in a line stretching back centuries. Using a chart in the tome's appendix, I plotted the upcoming lunar cycle alongside ancestral birth dates. I marked the precise nights I must return to the cove to renew the binding. Every ritual would now align with both nature's lunar ebb and our Marin family calendar, fulfilling the covenant my ancestors had sealed with their guardian spirits. Determined that future heirs would not be left in ignorance, I drafted a letter explaining the Watcher's origins and our family's duties. I placed it inside the chest, alongside the artifacts, to be discovered by the next unsuspecting Marin. My pen trembled as I wrote, "To my descendants you inherit not just these relics, but the responsibility to guard the silent spirit beneath the sands. May this guide serve you as it has me." That evening, under the glow of my desk lamp, I surveyed the assembled artifacts and family records. The chest, the talisman, the key, the rod, and the ancestral keepsakes formed a circle, physical and metaphorical, uniting past and present, sea and land. I understood that my role bridged 2 realms, guardian of an ancient spirit and keeper of my family's legacy. As night deepened, I wrote one final line in the grandmother's journal. "Tonight I stood where land meets sea, honoring vows beyond my birth. May I be found worthy by those who came before, and by those who follow." With the family legend now fully entwined with my own story, I closed the journal, rose from my desk, and prepared for the next tide. The Watcher's whisper was silent once more, but its legacy lived on in me. That evening I returned to my family's old seaside manor, now mostly shuttered yet still fragrant with memories. Inside the grand foyer, portraits of Marin ancestors lined the walls, their stern faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. The hush of the hall seemed to carry distant echoes, hurried footsteps, whispered conversations of long-gone kin fulfilling their own sentinel duties. As I climbed the sweeping staircase, a soft moan drifted from the library below. The hair on my arms bristled. I paused at the doorway and peered inside. A faint, translucent figure, pale as moonlight, hovered near a portrait of Alaric Marin. His outstretched hand pointed toward the window where the silver crescent moon shone. I cautiously entered the room, clutching the restored talisman and crescent rod. The spirit's eyes, like coals in a wind-blown hearth, fixed upon me. I stepped forward and spoke in a respectful tone. "Ancestor Alaric, I carry your legacy and bear your key. What message do you send?" The ghost's form shimmered. A soft gust rustled book pages. Then, as if with effort, it spoke in an ancient dialect I barely understood, yet the resonance was clear, approval tinged with urgency. The ghost's hand swept toward the manor's window, then traced an arc over its own chest as if reenacting the ritual I performed on the shore. It mouthed words I recognized from the binding invocation. This was both a blessing and a reminder. The Watcher's seal was maintained, but its grip threatened renewal. The spirit's gaze softened before fading, leaving me with a renewed sense of purpose. On the library desk lay an aged envelope addressed to "My courageous descendant." In trembling hands, I unfolded it. A final letter written by Alaric himself. It read, "To the future guardian, know that the Watcher's hunger ebbs and flows with tides of mortal fear. Keep faith in the binding. Should your heart falter, seek strength in our union." Beneath the signature, a handprint, smudged in silver chromate, served as his eternal seal. Tears welled in my eyes as I read Alaric's words. The centuries-old pact wasn't just duty. It was born of love and protection for countless generations. I pressed the talisman over my heart, feeling its warmth deepen. Then, I placed Alaric's letter in a small wooden box next to the chest, ensuring his voice would guide future heirs as it now guided me. That night, I returned to the cove for a final moonlit reaffirmation. Under the ghost's silent watch, I completed a shortened chant. By marine blood and ocean's vow, I stand where kin and spirit bow. With key, rod, eye made whole again, I seal the watcher, loss or gain. The tide responded with a gentle roar of approval. A solitary seagull cried overhead, a herald of ancestral satisfaction. Back at the manor, I placed the ghostly letter alongside the family journal, binding ritual tools, and Alaric's portrait in the chest. The room felt lighter, as though centuries of expectation had been honored. I closed the chest's lid one final time, knowing that the watcher's vigil would continue, safeguarded by history, ritual, and unwavering family loyalty. As dawn broke, the cove and manor alike lay tranquil. The chest rested in its secret alcove at the manor's foundation, ready for the next sentinel's discovery. And somewhere, in the liminal spaces between wakefulness and dream, the watcher slept once more, its breath slow and silent beneath the sands of time. With Alaric's blessing and the artifact secured, I embraced my role as the living link in a chain unbroken for centuries. Each generation of the Marin line would rise and answer the Watcher's call. Standing at the threshold between past and future, I whispered my own vow. I will guard the silent depths so the world above may remain unknowing and safe. Thus, as the cove tide receded and the manor's windows glowed with morning light, the Watcher's legacy lived on, hidden, bound, and eternally watched over by the Marin sentinel. Weeks after the dark ritual, I revisited the chest hidden in the manor's foundation. I'd nearly forgotten a small compartment beneath its velvet lining. This time, sliding aside the talisman's pouch, my fingertips brushed a folded scroll sealed with crimson wax. My pulse quickened. Had I overlooked this key piece? On a driftwood bench in the cove, I gently broke the wax seal bearing the same spiral and eye emblem. The parchment was brittle and water-stained, but its ink lines remained clear. A hand-drawn map of the shoreline and surrounding dunes, annotated in Latin and a symbol-laced cipher. A red X marked a jagged outcrop beyond the tide pools, an area I'd never explored. Consulting the leather-bound tome, I matched the map's cipher to the binding rituals chart. The Latin gloss read, "Where sea and stone conspire, the final key lies buried beneath the sentinel's gaze." The sentinel referred to a lone rock formation shaped like a watchful guardian, visible only at low tide near dawn. Determined to unearth the final artifact, I packed essentials: the crescent rod, the sunburst key, the restored talisman, and this newly discovered map. I also brought waterproof gear and a small trowel. The next low tide would be at dawn, giving me a narrow window. I set my alarm for 4 a.m., knowing the chest's secret might hinge on this lost map. At 4:15 a.m., under a waning gibbous moon, I followed the map's coastline path. The cove's familiar features receded as I waded through shallow pools. The Sentinel Rock, a tall, arched boulder, emerged, its silhouette eerily humanoid against the pre-dawn sky. Using the crescent rod, I traced the map's coordinates, 3 paces north of the sentinel's shoulder. I scraped aside wet sand until the trowel struck something hard. A small iron box, corroded but intact, winked in the moonlight. Its lid bore the same sunburst motif as the key. Undeniable proof this was the chest's missing link. My hands trembled as I inserted the sunburst key into the box's lock. With a satisfying click, the lid sprang open. Inside lay a single object, a tarnished mirror no larger than my palm, its frame etched with the eye spiral rune. The glass was clouded but reflective, as though frosted by centuries of sea air. Peering into the mirror, I expected only my own reflection. Instead, for an instant, I saw flickering images, the original ritual by Alaric's hand, sailors vanishing into waves, and a watery visage, an eye watching from below. The mirror was a conduit, capturing and replaying the Watcher's history. The tome's appendices described the Mirror of Recall as the ritual's keystone. To complete the binding, reflect the watcher's gaze back upon itself. Following the instructions, I held the mirror aloft, facing the sentinel rock. A shaft of dawn light struck its glass, projecting the sentinel's silhouette in reverse. The mirror trembled, then stilled, its surface cleared, now silent and inert. As the sun's first rays kissed the horizon, I stowed the mirror alongside the other artifacts. With this final piece, the Watcher's cycle was sealed. Chest, tome, key, talisman, rod, and mirror, all united in a binding chain. The map that revealed this last secret was now complete, its purpose fulfilled. I returned to the manor with a profound sense of closure and the knowledge that the Marin legacy would endure, safeguarded by all 6 artifacts beneath the sands and within our blood. With the mirror of recall secured in my satchel, I retraced my path across the dew-slicked dunes back to the family estate. Shadows from the sentinel rock lingered on the sand long after dawn, like silent witnesses to the chest's secret. By the time I reached the manor's wrought iron gates, the first birds were singing, heralding another day. I paused to catch my breath, hand pressed against the mirror's cool surface, proof that the Watcher's legacy was now fully mapped. Inside the manor's small archive room, I laid out the 6 artifacts on an oak table: the leather-bound tome, sunburst key, crescent rod, restored talisman, mirror, and the chest itself. Under the amber glow of my desk lamp, each item seemed to pulse with residual energy. I photographed them, carefully noting serial numbers and rune variations, then locked each into its padded compartment. This catalog would serve future Marin guardians, ensuring no piece could be misplaced or forgotten. Exploring a secret drawer in the archive desk, I discovered another family ledger. Its previous keeper had been Grandmother Elise. Between pages detailing household accounts, she had appended notes on the Watcher's cycle. Every 7 decades, a sentinel must renew the binding. Calculating against our timeline, I realized the next guardian would have less than 10 years before the Watcher stirred again. The ledger ended abruptly, the ink smudged, suggesting Elise never completed her entry. I sat back pondering the ledger's implications. The binding rituals happened on an almost generational schedule, but the chest's artifacts demanded constant vigilance. The chest itself remained hidden beneath the manor's foundation, yet its call echoed in my dreams. The knowledge that my descendants would face this duty both comforted and burdened me with the mantle of a dozen ancestors. That evening I performed a simple vigil, placing a single candle before the chest's hiding place and speaking aloud the invocation's opening line. The candle's flame flickered as if in response, then settled to steady glow. No hum or tremor followed, only the soft rustle of curtains and my own steady breath. In that hush, I felt kinship with every Marin who'd stood here before, candle in hand, protecting the world above from what lurked below. In preparation for the future, I drafted a Sentinel's Guide, a concise manual summarizing each artifact's purpose, the ritual steps, and the lunar schedule. Printed and bound in leather, it would sit alongside the tome for the next heir, sparing them days of deciphering arcane Latin. I tucked the guide into the archive's lockbox, inscribing my name and date in its opening page. Inspired by the ledger's jotted attempts, I designed a commemorative ring featuring the sunburst and eye motif. Crafted in silver, it bore small engravings of each rune around its band. Wearing it as a personal talisman, I felt the Watcher's presence more as a solemn pact than a threat. The ring symbolized both duty and unity, a wearable legacy passed from guardian to guardian. At dusk, I stood on the manor's highest balcony, gazing toward the cove where all had begun. The horizon rimmed with molten gold, waves rolled in gentle rhythms. I whispered a farewell to the shadows that had guided me, knowing they now rested bound beneath the sand. My silhouette merged with the fading light, sentinel of a secret older than memory. Clutching the ring and talisman, I descended to the library and dimmed the lights. Closing the tome softly, I murmured the ritual's final blessing. May the Watcher rest until the world again needs its guard. The chamber fell into quiet reverence, a sanctuary of lore and legacy. As the manor settled into night, I locked the archive door and placed its key with the others. The chest lay inert, the artifacts secure, and the covenant renewed. The Watcher slept in silent captivity, and in the heart of every Marin, from Alaric to the heir yet unborn, the binding would endure, traced by shadows, guided by moonlight, and watched over by those brave enough to keep the promise. Under a full moon's glow, I returned to the cove one last time for tonight's ritual, the dance of shadows. The tide was in, waves reaching the edge of the sand circle. I placed the restored talisman at the center and arranged my ring-worn hand over it. The crescent rod in my other hand traced the rune for Shadow's step on the damp sand, activating a faint phosphorescence beneath my feet. The tome described this dance as a binding reinforcement. Move in the circle's flow, let your silhouette weave the seal. I began, stepping carefully along the rune arc. Each footfall pressed a glowing glyph into the sand, which faded behind me. With each step, the hissing whisper of the Watcher's echo grew fainter, as though my movement cast its shadow into the ground, stifling its will. As I circled the talisman, I recited a rhythmic chant, steps of dusk, steps of light, bury the echo of restless night. Shadow and sea bind and blend, night's dark hunger now shall end. My voice blended with the ocean's cadence, forging a union of movement, word, and water. With each repetition, my shadow elongated across the cove, dancing in harmony with the chant. The other shadows, of rocks and driftwood, seemed to animate, weaving around mine in a silent ballet. Together, they formed a latticework of silhouettes, weaving an invisible net that encircled the talisman's glow. Midway through the dance, a low surge rattled the chest's location under the dunes. The Watcher's hum, a persistent pulse, wavered, then diminished as the shadows wove tighter. I felt the power draw inward, trapped by the geometry of my steps and the soft illumination of the ritual glyphs. Concluding the final verse, I lifted the crescent rod high, its moonhead catching direct lunar light. I drove its tip into the sand beside the talisman, planting it like a beacon of stilled power. The rod's glow flared, then calmed to a steady silver flame, sealing the shadows into stillness. The whispers ceased entirely. The stones I'd placed earlier lay undisturbed, and the circle's glyphs faded back to bare sand. Only the rod and talisman remained luminous icons of the ritual's success. The cove fell into profound silence, a testament to the shadow's dance cloaking the Watcher forever. Breathless but triumphant, I retrieved the artifacts and buried the crescent rod beside the sentinel rock, its resting place until the next guardian summons it. I brushed sand from my palms, letting the tide erase my footprints, ensuring the dance's memory remained only in the artifacts and the tome's pages. The Dance of Shadows was more than a ritual. It was a living expression of the covenant between bloodline and spirit. Each guardian must perform it under the full moon, moving with intention to renew the binding. As I headed back to the manor, I felt the legacy flow through my veins, the footsteps of ancestors echoing with each stride. Standing on the dune's crest, I gazed at moonlit waves, rolling in silent procession. The chest, buried beneath the manor's foundations, waited in peace. The Watcher slept, its hunger stilled by shadowed movement. I whispered a final vow. In step with shadows, I uphold the seal, tonight and every night to come. With that promise echoing through the night, I turned away, guardian of the dance, sentinel of silence, and keeper of an ancient, undying vow. Back in my study at the manor, I placed the 6 artifacts on the oak table under a soft lamp glow. The leather-bound tome lay open to its final chapters, titled Veritas et Redemptio, Truth and Salvation. Here, the original Sandward Mason had outlined not only how to bind the Watcher, but how to free both the spirit and its keepers from eternal duty. Salvation, it seemed, required an act of ultimate compassion. I read aloud the Latin incantation, translating line by line. When the guardian's heart grows heavy, and blood and sand have paid their due, let mercy's hand unmake the bond, and in release, both watch and watcher renew. Through footnotes, Mason explained that after 7 successive renewals, one ritual must be offered not to bind, but to liberate, allowing the Watcher's soul to finally rest and passing the mantle to a new protective force. According to the text, the mercy ritual required a personal token, something deeply loved, and the Watcher's seal symbol. The guardian must place this token inside the chest, speak a final invocation of release, and then break the seal with the crescent rod. The act would shatter the original binding chain, setting the Watcher free and at the same time granting the family's heirs relief from their ancestral burden. I reflected on what I could offer. The family's ring, symbol of duty, or perhaps a cherished photograph of my grandmother, the one who unknowingly guided me. I chose a personal locket, engraved with my mother's portrait, a symbol of love that had bound me to this duty. Its presence represented the human connections that had sustained every guardian before me. At midnight, under a waning gibbous moon, I carried the chest to the cove. Inside, I arranged the 6 artifacts around the locket, placing the token at the heart. The tide's rhythmic lull served as witness. I lit 3 white candles at the sentinel rock's base, representing past, present, and future guardians, to illuminate the chest's interior. Holding the crescent rod aloft, I recited Mason's final lines. By love's pure bond and sacred trust, I free you from this mortal crust. Watcher of sand, now go in peace, our chains of fear and duty cease. As the last word slipped from my lips, I pressed the rod into the chest's seal. There was no rumble, only a gentle sigh that rippled through the air. The candles flickered, and the moonlight shone through the locket's glass, refracting into soft beams. A subtle warmth emanated from the chest, flooding my skin with calm. Then, the internal vent that once hummed opened briefly, releasing a final breath of wind that scattered the flame-white petals I had strewn as an offering. With the seal broken, I closed the lid for the last time. The chest's metal cooled instantly, its runes receding into silent etchings. The Watcher was free, released to its next journey beyond mortal confines. In freeing the spirit, I had also liberated my descendants from a cycle of unending vigil. As the first light of dawn glimmered, I buried the chest, now empty of power, beneath a flowering willow at the cove's edge, a living marker of salvation. In the Sentinel's Guide and the Salvation Locket, I left beside its roots, a testament to mercy's triumph over fear. Returning to the manor, I closed the tome and placed it on the archive shelf. Where once the artifacts bound me to duty, now the principle of mercy bound us all. The Marin legacy would live on, not in endless binding, but in acts of compassion, an inheritance that no curse could touch. Weeks passed peacefully after the mercy ritual. The beach lay quiet at dawn, and the manor's halls felt lighter without nightly vigils. Yet one moonless night, I awoke to a faint tremor beneath my bedroom floorboards. A pulse echoing the very hum I thought I'd banished. My heart sank. Had liberating the Watcher instead unleashed a new force? The next morning, I found the manor's marble foyer scraped with newly formed scratch marks, rune shapes matching none in the tome. Outside, the tide had receded further than ever before, revealing debris strewn across the sands, broken branches, seaweed braided into knot-like patterns, and a single quartz shard, identical to fragments from the talisman I'd repaired. I gathered the Sentinel's Guide and cross-referenced the new runes. There, in a margin scrawled by Sandward Mason himself, was a warning. False peace invites the rift. When binding breaks, shadow stirs anew. The rift described a fracture between worlds, a gap allowing primal echoes to seep through. By freeing the Watcher without re-establishing a protective ward, I may have opened that rift. In haste, I retrieved the 6 artifacts from their resting place: the chest, tome, key, rod, talisman, and mirror. Each felt unnervingly cold, as though drained of benign energy. The mercy locket lay on my desk. Its portrait glass was cracked, as if the act of mercy itself came at the cost of something precious. The Sentinel's Guide described an emergency rite of reconciliation to close the rift, performed only under a new moon. That night, I returned to the cove with all artifacts in the shattered locket. I drew a vast circle in the sand with the crescent rod, then placed the artifacts at equal intervals, mirror at north, key at east, rod at south, talisman at west, book and chest at center. Opening the tome to the newly discovered emergency appendix, I began the chant of reforging. From mercy's fracture and watchers freed, we call the lost to heal the bleed. Shadow and light return as one. Let rift be sealed ere break of sun. As the chant rose, the quartz shard at the circle center quivered and emitted a pale glow. One by one, I pressed each artifact into the glowing quartz ring, infusing it with their regained energy. The mirror reflected the key's sunburst, the talisman's eye, and the rod's crescent in a swirling braid of light. The chest's runes sparked as the book's pages flicked on their own, illustrating the rite's final verse. A gust of wind tore across the circle, carrying an otherworldly wail. Shadows converged at the center, forming a dark vortex. I raised the crescent rod and recited the closing line. By bond of kin and vow of soul, we seal the breach, restore the whole. With a final strike, I plunged the rod's tip into the quartz ring. A silent shockwave rippled through the cove, then everything stilled. The wind died instantly. The sky brightened as clouds parted to reveal stars. The artifacts, now resting in the cooled ring, pulsed faintly with balanced harmony. The rift had closed, the Watcher's legacy reaffirmed under a new covenant, one forged of sacrifice and unity. As dawn broke, I gathered the artifacts and returned them to the Manor's archive. Though the mercy ritual's liberation had nearly doomed us, the emergency rite had restored equilibrium. The Marin legacy remained one of binding and release, of mercy and vigilance. And I, as sentinel, would stand ready for whichever the next tide demanded. Weeks after sealing the rift, the Manor fell into uneasy quiet, until a stormy night when branches lashed against windows. I awoke to a flicker of lightning illuminating the study, where the artifacts lay undisturbed. A sudden tremor shook the floor. The Watcher's presence, drawn to the emergency rite's residual energy, was testing its bonds one last time. Under the thunder's rat-tat, I gathered the chest, tome, key, rod, talisman, and mirror into the candle-lit hall. Their combined aura hummed with power, like a heartbeat echoing in the walls. The final confrontation was at hand. I would face the Watcher directly to reaffirm the new covenant. A low voice filled the hall, undulating shadows on the walls, as though the Watcher's specter paced behind the flickering candlelight. The voice spoke in ancient cadence. Guardian, you bind and unbind. But can you stand when the Watcher's gaze pierces your soul? My grip tightened on the crescent rod. I stepped forward, voice unwavering in the storm's roar. I arranged the artifacts in a triple helix pattern, chest and tome at the center, mirror and talisman on either side, and key and rod forming the outer arc. Lightning cast stark shadows, each artifact's rune momentarily lit. I recited the ritual of reckoning from the tome, an invocation to test the Guardian's resolve and reaffirm the binding's integrity. With each verse, the shadow shifted, coalescing into a figure wreathed in mist and storm. The Watcher's eye glowed within the darkness as it loomed over the artifacts. My pulse raced as thunder clapped. The tome's final lines demanded, "Face the Watcher's truth, and prove your heart is steadfast." I raised the mirror, reflecting the Watcher's gaze back into its own form. In the mirror's glass, I saw not a monster, but a mournful entity, a guardian spirit itself bound by duty. Its voice softened. "Release me not with fear, but with understanding. The bond is your choice, not your chains." Lightning stilled as the Watcher's silhouette receded into the artifact's glow, acknowledging the empathy that underpinned true guardianship. I placed the talisman atop the chest, slid the key into its lock, and whispered the tonic verse. By mercy's breath and binding flame, We serve the pact, not servitude's name. The chest inhaled the talisman's glow, sealing the watcher's spirit in a pact of mutual respect. The storm abated. Candle flames steadied. The artifact's runes shimmered once, then stilled in peaceful luminescence. The hall's shadows returned to normal, and the watcher's presence dissolved into gentle quiet. As dawn broke through storm-torn clouds, I lined the artifacts back in the archive, adding a final note to the Sentinel's guide. In the watcher's gaze, stand with compassion. A true guardian binds with heart, not only with ritual. The chest's power rested peacefully beneath the manor. The watcher slept in harmony with the family's legacy, its spirit no longer a threat, but a reminder of the fragile bond between human and supernatural. And I, its chosen sentinel, remained watchful, ready to guide future heirs with both wisdom and empathy. The morning after the storm, I returned once more to the cove. The chest lay buried beneath its willow marker, the tide gently lapping its hidden location. I stood at the edge of the sand circle, artifacts safely stowed, and performed a silent vigil, hands folded, eyes closed, honoring both the watcher and my family's centuries-long covenant. Even in peace, the air crackled with latent energy, a reminder that true calm is but the quiet before a new dawn. As I opened my eyes, I heard faint echoes, the distant rhythm of the binding hum, the soft crackle of candle flame, the whispered syllables of no longer recited chants. These were not failures of the rite, but echoes of memory, the layers of rituals past resonating in the present. The watcher's presence, though sealed, left its imprint on the world, woven into the very fabric of wind and wave. I traced the rune of the spiral on my palm, a symbol of eternal return. My reflection shimmered in the mirror stowed at my belt. My face bore the calm determination of one who has faced darkness and both bound and freed it. I understood then. Guardianship is never finished. The watcher's story, and mine, would continue as long as someone remembered to hold the line. With respect, I scattered handfuls of purified salt around the willow's roots, tokens of completion and protection. Each grain represented an unbroken link in the chain, ancestor to ancestor, guardian to guardian. The chest's hidden resting place was sanctified once more, its canopy of willow leaves bearing witness. Silence washed over the cove like a benediction, no whisper, no tremor, only the soft sigh of dawn wind. In that hush, I felt the true victory, not in vanquishing a spirit, but in creating a lasting peace. The watcher slept, not as a captive, but as a partner in a shared covenant of balance. I tucked the Sentinel's guide into my coat and walked the shoreline home. Each footprint I left was a promise, that I would return, that I would teach the next guardian, and that I would never forget. The artifact's power, once a source of fear, had become a beacon of responsibility and compassion. Behind me, the tide pools shimmered, each a mirror of memory and possibility. Beneath their glassy surface lay shadows of the watcher's long sleep, undisturbed. But I knew that beneath the sands of time, countless watchers watched back. Our destinies intertwined, a dance of shadows and light. Pausing on the dune's crest, I whispered into the developing light. To the watcher, I offer not chains but understanding. In our silence we find harmony. In our vigilance we find peace. The words drifted on the breeze, carried into the world beyond the cove. Turning away, I left the cove behind, carrying the quiet tension of a guardianship fulfilled yet unending. The morning sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing the world in warmth. My path led inland, back to the manor, to family, and to tomorrow's tasks, but always with one eye on the sea's horizon. As I made my way home, the rune-etched ring on my finger caught the sunlight. It was a subtle glint, easy to miss, but it was enough. A guardian's mark, a silent pact, a reminder that the Watcher's legacy would live on through me and the heirs who followed. And so, the story closes, not with an end, but with a vow, that the shadows will always be watched, and the peace ever renewed. If this den story saga of ancient curses, family legacies, and shadowed pacts held you spellbound, please like, subscribe, and tap the book so you never miss our next daily dive into the unknown. Comment below with, "I'd guard the Watcher" or "I'd free it." I'll share the most intriguing replies in tomorrow's episode. Thank you for joining me on this journey from salty sands to moonlit rituals. Tomorrow, prepare for a brand new, fully scripted tale that will unravel another hidden secret. Until then, remember,